Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. Today's video we are going to be continuing talking about NFL teams and their fantasy football previews. We are now going to the Chicago Bears. So, first of all, if you can guess the name of the song that I started out this video with, then I will answer one of your fantasy football questions and mention you on this channel. So yeah, comment and guess the song. Also, if you have any questions in general, my channel right now only has 38 subscribers, so chances are I will probably answer your question just because I'm a small channel and I don't have a lot of subscribers. So any appreciation or comments you can give would be much appreciated by me. And yeah, so we'll go from there. Like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. I post a wide variety of content. You can check it out. And yeah, we're going through all the NFL teams this summer, doing a preview of them. So yeah, check it out. So we will now move to the Chicago Bears. And let's take a look at their schedule, as I've been doing with all the teams. Chicago Bears, what stands out to me with their schedule is that they start out with one of the best defenses in the NFL. They play the Los Angeles Rams. So what that means is that for week one, you might expect that these players might not have a great game on offense. And this is important because, you know, week one, it always, like, first impressions, week one, for a lot of casualty fans and fantasy owners, they might get scared off by the Chicago Bears numbers after week one. And then you have a perfect window of opportunity after week one, between week 2 through 5, where they're playing terrible defenses. And you could really take advantage of your opportunities. So they start out after they played at the Rams in week 1. They play week 2 versus the Cincinnati Bengals, which the Bengals are a team that literally their defense is like a colander. It's just, they're terrible. I know this because I grew up in Cincinnati. They're not a good defense. And then they play the Cleveland Browns, which is supposed to be a good defense. And then but then after that, they've got the Detroit Lions, the Las Vegas Raiders. So you look at those first 2 weeks, depending on how the Browns game goes, I could see that potentially being a higher scoring game. But between the Bengals, Lions, and Raiders, you have some of the worst defenses in the NFL between week 2 and 5. So it's a perfect window of opportunity to trade for the Bears players. It's an example of the whole concept of buying low and selling high on players based on their numbers, trying to flip your assets for better values like you're a stockbroker, that I've talked about a couple times on this channel. If you're interested in hearing about that, that's one of my favorite parts of fantasy football, is trying to maximize somebody's value and make trades out of it. And that's one of the best ways that you can be successful and win your league. So stay tuned for more content like this. If you're interested in seeing how you could win your league, I go through a lot of strategies. I have a video that talks about it, and I've been applying it to all these teams as well. So yeah, and they say it gets a little more difficult for the Bears later on in their schedule, but then their playoff schedule is relatively favorable. They've got the Minnesota Vikings, which their defense is okay, but it's not what it used to be. Then they go to Seattle, which is a defense that was not very good at all last year. And then they play the New York Giants, which is another defense that's not anything spectacular. So relatively favorable schedule, but still the Bears' offense was not great last year. So they're hoping that they can turn it around now that they've got some new players, and we'll talk about that. But keep in mind that even though there's some favorable matchups, the offense kind of had some difficulties last year. So we'll see what some of their new quarterbacks and new players can do for them. So yeah, let's move to quarterbacks. So the big acquisition that they made, well, they had two. They acquired Andy Dalton from the Dallas Cowboys, and then they traded up in the draft to draft Justin Fields with the number 11 pick in the NFL draft. So what do you do with these players? So based on the reports I'm seeing, it looks like Andy Dalton is going to be the starter for the season, which I think makes sense. It gives Justin Fields a little bit of time to learn the system behind a veteran. But I really do not have a lot of confidence in Andy Dalton, especially considering that week 1 matchup, to have him on my draft boards at all. I think he's a guy that he could be a good waiver stream, especially week 2 against the Bengals, week 4 against the Lions, things like that. He could have some good games, but he's not a guy that you want to be drafting. He's generally one of those guys that he's just going to depend on the matchup, and you might want to be able to pick him up on waivers. But the real question that people have is, what do you do with Justin Fields? When is he going to take over? How good is he going to be? And I personally do not think that he's necessarily going to come in and just break away the league and all of a sudden become a must-start in fantasy. I personally don't really see that happening. One, the offense is not particularly an explosive offense. So keep in mind that the Bears last year, they run a lot of like gadget plays and try to utilize their speed guys to do a lot of trick plays and misdirection and stuff like that. But I don't think it necessarily worked particularly well for them. And so it's a team that generally relies more on their defense. So I don't imagine that it's going to be a system that Justin Fields can just step up into and then all of a sudden grasps quickly is one thing. And then the other thing too is that Justin Fields, he's not necessarily the best, like, he can run, he's got mobility, but he's not a guy that's going to break away and drive the ball down the field with his legs. He's kind of more of a down the field bomb thrower. I'm not really sure how his game is exactly going to translate to the NFL. There's been some questions about how that would work, considering he's from Ohio State. A lot of Ohio State quarterbacks, namely Dwayne Haskins, struggled when they got to the NFL. So, but he's definitely a guy that I want to keep an eye on because I think that there is potential that he eventually becomes the Bears starter this season and could actually become it pretty quickly. If the Bears start off poorly, they might look to switch things up relatively quickly and then give Justin Fields a shot because Matt Nagy is essentially coaching for his job this season. He's on the hot seat. So a lot of questions that go into this, but for Justin Fields, I would not draft him at this time, but he is somebody to keep an eye on as the Bears season goes along. If they're struggling, maybe he's somebody that you might want to take a look at whenever he gets the opportunity to start and maybe stash him. But I would not spend a draft pick on him at this time. I would simply monitor the quarterback situation because you never know when he's actually going to step up into the seat and become the starter. Running backs. So this is an interesting running back situation for the Chicago Bears. So their starting running back that they have is David Montgomery. He's been their running back for the last 2 seasons, and he's been relatively up and down. So his rookie year, he kind of struggled to really get any footing. Didn't necessarily. A lot of people liked him as a sleeper that could break into a void in the backfield and then become a breakout running back. He did not necessarily take advantage of that, and he started off last season as well very poorly, but he had a strong finish to the season and actually was the number 4 running back in PPR and the number 6 running back in standards. But in my opinion, that ranking is a little deceiving because he was one of the few running backs in the NFL that actually played all 16 games. So that being said, if you remember, we had a lot of running back injuries last year. Saquon Barkley tore his ACL. Christian McCaffrey had ankle sprain and wrist sprain and various things that kept him out. Things like that. So not everybody was 100% healthy, especially the guys that you were taking earlier on in the draft. But David Montgomery was one of the ones that actually played all 16 games and was relatively productive for you. So, in my opinion, I think given that he had a strong finish this season, he's a guy that I would not be surprised if he does have a breakout season this year and builds off that momentum. But this is a guy who's been relatively up and down. So I'm really going to play this by the draft boards with him. If he's a guy that slips in the draft, I would consider taking him because he's as a maybe 6th to 8th round pick. I think he's pretty good value. But if he's going higher than that, I would personally avoid him. And then there's some other running backs as well in this backfield that I want to talk about too. So Damien Williams is a running back who came over from the Kansas City Chiefs. If you remember, Damien Williams didn't play last season. He opted out because of COVID-19. He had a good season with Kansas City in 2019. He was essentially their lead back. Granted, Kansas City is not necessarily a team that needs to rely on a power running back. Ever since Kareem Hunt left, they've kind of been more of a committee backfield, and it's generally worked well for them. So I don't know how Damien Williams is going to do on the Bears, considering that he's been out for a full year. I think there's potential that he could have a good season, but I also would not be surprised as well if he struggles to make a roster spot. Another guy as well that's been on the Bears and has been productive in the past is Tarik Cohen. Tarik Cohen is kind of that guy that he's like the new Darren Sproles or Danny Woodhead, a small running back that's a PPR machine that everybody likes. But he's coming off an ACL tear. And it's a little concerning to me how he's going to do off of that. And then also, considering that they're bringing in a rookie running back that I'm going to talk about in a sec, I'm wondering what the amount of touches are going to be for Tarik Cohen. He's going to be a change of pace guy that they could use, but his volume is not always there. It was very good in 2018. He had a very good season, 2018. He had a very good season, but since then he's kind of been a little bit up and down. And a lot of this depends on how I think Andy Dalton and or Justin Fields do with his backfield, but keep an eye on that. But the running back that I do want to talk about is Khalil Herbert. He is a rookie running back from Virginia Tech that the Chicago Bears drafted in, I believe, the 3rd round. I'm going to double check this real quick. 6th round. I'm sorry. I don't know why I thought 3rd. You know what it was? Is he was the 4th. He was their 4th draft pick, so I assumed that he might. I don't know. My bad on that one. But anyway, so he is an interesting running back to keep an eye on because he's If David Montgomery struggles again to start the season and is relatively unproductive, Damien Williams is also rusty because he's starting off the season slow. Maybe Herbert might be able to step up and fill a void on this team in the running back core. He's what he projects to be is kind of more of that power running back. He's not necessarily a speed change of pace guy, so I don't think he would have a ton of PPR value given that. But it's worth monitoring this running back backfield because it's not necessarily been great, but there's a lot there's a lot to monitor with this backfield. I feel like a lot of our opinions are going to change with the Bears backfield as the season goes on. Wide receivers. So we now move to another focal point that I like, and that's Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson was a target machine last year. He was the number 9 wide receiver in fantasy football for PPR formats. He gets a lot of targets and a lot of receptions. He didn't necessarily have a lot of breakout games, but I think a lot of that is because the quarterback play was so poor for them last year. But if he's a guy that I think if he's going to be in the 3rd or 4th round, I think I would definitely try to grab him. He's going to get a lot of targets for them, and I think Andy Dalton and Justin Fields will do a better job of getting the ball to him. Andy Dalton has had some productive seasons in the past with running with receivers like AJ Green, things like that, guys that he can just kind of rely upon as receivers, and I think that Allen Robinson could be one of those guys. So I think it's going to be worth seeing where he falls in the draft board as well, but if he's a guy that's going to slip a little bit, I would definitely try and grab him. Another underrated guy that I really like is Darnell Mooney. He kind of started off a little slow, but he really kind of came into his own as the season went on as the secondary wide receiver that the Bears could rely upon. He is a second-year player. Remember, the rookie years, his rookie year was shortened because of COVID, so now that he's got some time with the Bears in the offseason, I think there's potential that he could improve. And he could really step up as the number 2 receiver for them. So I really like his prospects going into the season, and I think a lot of people don't really know who he is. So he's a good guy to take a flyer on in the mid to late rounds of the draft, in my opinion. Other wide receivers they have on their team, Anthony Miller, I'm not a fan of his at all. I think a big thing to keep an eye on as well is that he started out the season well, but then ended with getting 2 or 3 receptions a game on 2 or 3 targets. Didn't have a touchdown at all last season since week 3. And I think a lot of that is because Mooney kind of stepped up into that void. Anthony Miller has always been mediocre to me. I would avoid him. Other guys they've got that are interesting are Marquise Goodwin. He's a very fast receiver that's coming here as a free agent. Javin Wims had some productivity last year, but I'm not sure if they're going to get a roster spot on this team, so I would not necessarily try to draft them at all. Dazz Newsome is a 6th-round receiver that the Bears drafted. He's got some potential to step up because they definitely have a need for a number 3 receiver on this team. He's worth keeping an eye on as a guy that you can slot in as your receiver. So, tight end. We now move to one of the classic examples of hype versus young production that's probably better that I like to talk about. And one of the players I'm going to tell you to avoid, despite people that will still be drafting him, is Jimmy Graham. This guy is way past his prime. He has not been a productive fantasy football player for the last 3 seasons. And I know that he had like his great years with New Orleans where he was very good, but those years are long gone. And he's on the Bears now, which is a team that struggled. And if you even look at the Bears depth chart, they have Kmet, who's a younger tight end, as the starter over Jimmy Graham. So the fact that like the Bears are even acknowledging that this guy is done is just a sign to me that you should not even waste a pick on Jimmy Graham. I would not draft Kmet either by any means because he was not a great tight end for the Bears. But it's just an example of if you're going to take anybody in this system, if you're going to like stream a tight end for the matchup, I would much rather have Kmet than Jimmy Graham because Jimmy Graham is a guy that has been on the decline. I think that's just going to continue to be the case as the season goes on. And it's just not worth it to me. And I'm just telling you that now because he's probably going to be on draft boards and he's a guy that you want to avoid at all costs pretty much. The Bears defense. So remember, this is a very good defense. They were projected to be the number 1 defense in the league last year, but didn't necessarily live up to that. But they're still one of a very good defense that you can always rely upon. And they've got some productive players. This is going to be a team that is going to, their defense is going to keep them in games. But you got to monitor the draft boards and see where they fall because they're going to probably go relatively high. And in my opinion, it might not be worth the pick taking them. But I still think that this is very good value, especially you're in a division that could potentially not have Aaron Rodgers anymore and throw Jordan Love into the fire. We don't know how he's going to be. So that's 2 games against them. You've got 2 games against the Lions, which project to be one of the worst teams and worst offenses in the NFL. You've also got the Minnesota Vikings, which Kirk Cousins has been inconsistent at times. So they've got some very exploitable matchups that they can face. So personally, I think this could be very good value. I'm going to monitor to see where they go in boards, but it's a defense that I'm definitely interested in drafting. Their kicker is Cairo Santos. Of course, the Bears are well known for their kicking issues, but it actually improved a little bit last year with him. Still, I think that this is a stream option at best, in my opinion, because to me, the offense is going to struggle to get the ball down the field, might not have a ton of field goal opportunities. So I would personally not try to draft Cairo Santos. I would just keep an eye on him as a kicker that you might be able to stream from week to week. But especially in week 1 against the Rams, don't draft him, in my opinion. All right, well, that's all that I got on the Chicago Bears for this video. I'm going to continue to go alphabetically. I'm going to talk about one of our favorite teams and one of my least favorite teams, the Dallas Cowboys. I'm a Washington fan, so I hate the Cowboys, but that's just me personally. But anyway, we will go to them next, and we'll continue to go through the NFL teams this offseason and preview their fantasy football outlooks. So like, comment, and subscribe if you're interested in this, and